Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named 9 Bodies in a Mexican Morgue. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The story begins in a desert in Mexico where a man and a woman park their car on a hillside. The woman tells the man to pretend to be fixing the car while he uses binoculars to observe a distant military base. Unbeknownst to them, something unusual is happening inside that base today. 9 bodies have just been delivered. So far, authorities have confirmed that all 9 bodies came from a small plane that crashed 8 days ago while flying from Guatemala to Houston. Among the deceased were a pilot, a flight attendant, and 7 passengers. How they died and who these passengers really were remains a mystery. Back on the hill, the man asks what they should do next. The woman replies calmly that they should wait and see. So what really happened? Let's rewind the clock 8 days. Aboard the small plane, the flight attendant is serving drinks to the 8 passengers. One blonde woman named Amy, clearly uneasy, asks if they were supposed to be flying over the ocean and why it is all forest down there. The flight attendant explains that pilots often adjust their routes due to weather, and it's nothing to worry about. Her husband, Dan, tries to reassure her as well. But inside the cockpit, the reality is far more dire. The GPS has failed, and the pilot is navigating with a paper map. He's completely off course. Worse, fuel is running low, and no one is responding to his distress calls. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he pulls out his phone and begins recording a farewell message to his wife. Back in the cabin, passengers start to sense something is wrong. The plane begins to lose altitude rapidly, and then the propellers stop spinning. Without warning, the aircraft begins an emergency descent over the dense jungle. Miraculously, all 8 passengers survive the crash with only minor injuries. The flight attendant, however, is not so lucky. Her neck was snapped by the force of the impact. 2 passengers, Zach and Kevin, immediately try to open the cockpit door, while another passenger named Carlos works on opening the main cabin door. When they finally pry open the cockpit, they find the pilot barely alive, a tree branch having pierced his chest. At the same time, Carlos manages to open the door, but instead of helping put out the fire breaking out on the plane, he starts rummaging through his luggage. Thankfully, the girl Sonia grabs a fire extinguisher and douses the flames. She confronts Carlos, confused and angry about his priorities. On the first day after the crash, 9 people remain alive, with the pilot in a deep coma. The overweight couple, hopeful about being rescued, focus on surviving. Since the plane is in a tropical rainforest, they can't leave the flight attendant's body inside. It would rot quickly, so the group decides to move it elsewhere. Meanwhile, Dan tries to calm his wife, but there's something strange about the nearby forest. It feels like they're being watched. Inside the cabin, Sonia is organizing supplies when the woman in fat named Lisa joins her. From their conversation, we learn Lisa doesn't think much of Sonia, who's British, and insists that she should be in charge of the supplies. Sonia just ignores her smelly bullshit. The pilot suddenly regains consciousness just as the 2 men return from moving the body. He manages to state his name and explain the crash. The GPS failed, the radio went silent, and he's not sure if his distress call was ever received. Seeing him in pain, Zach urges Kevin to help, assuming he's a doctor based on how he'd previously described the flight attendant's injuries using medical terminology. But the man dismisses him, saying he once was a doctor, but he is not anymore. He then explains the pilot's injuries: multiple fractures, a punctured chest, not fatal to the heart, thankfully, but likely a tension pneumothorax. If the lung keeps leaking air into the chest cavity, the man won't survive. He adds that the only way to save him is a thoracotomy, but they don't have the equipment, and if he dies on his own, it's a plane crash fatality. If he dies under his hands, it's illegal practice, so he decides not to do it. With that, no one dares push him any further. Sometime later, the group gathered and sat in a circle. Zach suggested they each introduce themselves. He took the lead, explaining that he was an insurance investigator. He'd come to Guatemala to look into a suspected arson for insurance fraud case and was on his way back to the U.S. headquarters to report his findings. Next up were the newlyweds, Amy and her husband Dan. They had only been married for 5 weeks and were on their honeymoon. Meanwhile, Lisa and her chubby husband, Chubby, ran a chain of roadside motels and were also vacationing. Sonia introduced herself as a solo traveler, but didn't offer any other details. Kevin admitted he used to be a doctor, but now made a living selling medical equipment, hence his trip to Guatemala. Finally, there was Carlos, who revealed he was a professional wrestler. Chubby scoffed, clearly unimpressed, and made a sarcastic remark. But Carlos clapped back instantly. Carlos explained he was headed to the U.S. for an important match he'd spent months training for. But now they had bigger concerns. Their phones had no signal. They didn't know if the black box had sent out a beacon or if it was even intact. As night began to fall, the question became, sleep inside the plane or outside? Amy preferred the plane, but Sonia shut that idea down, saying it's way too stuffy in there. She could get heat stroke. She added that while the jungle might have snakes, bugs, and rats, they typically wouldn't attack unless provoked. Then Lisa brought up the issue of food. She and Sonia had just taken inventory, 15 bottles of drinking water, a few veggie salads, and some small snacks like chocolate. There was no way to tell if those rations would last them until help arrived. Still, as she said, hungry or not, they had to eat. As they ate, they discussed whether someone should hike to the top of the hill tomorrow to check for cell signal. Meanwhile, Kevin noticed Chubby taking heart medication. He asked about it and learned the man had 6 days' worth left. But with confidence, Chubby said the medication was enough for him. The pilot, however, was coughing harder and looking worse. The others begged Kevin to help. After some hesitation, he agreed. He asked Sonia to grab the first aid kit from the plane, then said he needed a scalpel. Before he could finish his sentence, Chubby pulled a sharp hunting knife from his pocket. Once everything was ready, Kevin sterilized the tools with vodka and got to work. With no anesthetic available, he had Zach take off his belt and jam it into the pilot's mouth. Moments later, the pilot's chicken screams echoed through the jungle. That night, Amy and Dan chose to sleep inside the plane. As they chatted, she noticed tree branches moving outside and pressed her face to the window. She asked if he saw that person just now, but Dan replied she was seeing things. By the campfire, the chubby couple watched Carlos wander off alone, muttering some racially charged remarks under their breath. Seizing the moment, Lisa tried to open Carlos's suitcase but gave up when she found it was locked. Back at the makeshift operating table, Kevin's procedure went smoothly. He used surgical thread from his own luggage to suture the pilot's wound, saying if he can just make it through the night, he'll live. Zach sincerely thanked him for his efforts. Later that night, as everyone drifted into deep sleep, a shadowy figure appeared on screen. The mysterious person first observed Carlos doing late-night exercises from afar, then crept back to the camp, picked up a piece of clothing from the ground, and suddenly smothered the pilot's face with it. At dawn, the group awoke to a grim discovery. The pilot was dead like a piece of smelly shit. Kevin was devastated and confused. There was no sign of infection or internal bleeding. The only explanation he could come up with was post-op shock. He blamed himself for not staying with the pilot through the night. At that moment, the scene cut back to the military base 8 days later. A sidekick soldier shockingly discovered 10 passports in the wreckage, but only 9 bodies had been found. It meant one person might still be alive. With the pilot's death, only 8 passengers remained. The sweltering heat meant they had to move the body quickly. As Zach and Kevin carried the corpse, the pilot's phone slipped out of his pocket. Dan noticed, and when no one was looking, hurried over to snatch it up. Amy frowned, asking him what the point was since he didn't even know the passcode. Dan just smiled and said nothing. He then grabbed a roll of toilet paper from the plane and headed into the woods, claiming nature was calling his smelly shit. What no one noticed, though, was that he quietly pocketed the hunting knife before he left. Meanwhile, Zach and Kevin laid the pilot's body next to the flight attendants. The two sighed in disbelief. 2 people dead in just 2 days. The heat was getting worse, and there was still no sign of rescue. They struck up a conversation, and through it, we finally learned Kevin's backstory. He once owned a private clinic, but after a tragic malpractice incident involving a child, he lost everything: his savings, his medical license, his marriage, and custody of his daughter. Back at camp, the others were sorting through the wreckage. Chubby beamed as he found his suitcase and told Sonia it was just full of workout gear. Elsewhere, Dan was now standing over the pilot's body, using the knife to cut off one of his fingers. Meanwhile, Lisa whispered to her husband that the pilot was murdered. She pointed out the telltale signs: purple skin, bloodshot eyes, classic signs of asphyxiation. Her husband looked puzzled, asking for her reason. She explained, with limited resources, one less mouth means the rest of them live a little longer. That sounded like a motive. So she warned him not to tell the others, for now. Sonia and Amy were having a chat of their own. It turned out Amy was actually a rich heiress and Dan was her family's driver. The two had secretly gotten married, and this so-called honeymoon trip was something they'd hidden from her family. Back to Dan. After successfully using the severed finger to unlock the pilot's phone, he correctly guessed the photo album password. It was full of pictures of the pilot and his wife. But when he tried to open a banking app, it required another password. Frustrated, Dan gave up and tossed the finger aside. Elsewhere, Carlos had been busy dismantling the black box. He discovered that the backup battery still worked. It was the damaged antenna that had prevented it from sending out a signal. He told Zach and Kevin that if they could build a makeshift antenna and get it to a mountaintop, they might have a shot at calling for help. The 3 shared the update with everyone. Carlos, despite being a wrestler, said his father owned an electronics repair shop. He might be able to craft a working antenna. Zach quickly organized a plan. Carlos would work on the antenna, and after sundown, he and a few others would head out in search of a water source. If all went well, they'd hike up with the black box the next day. That afternoon, as everyone rested at the campsite, Amy suddenly spotted something alarming. A man hiding in the woods, watching them. But when she looked again, he was gone. Carlos was stripping wire from the plane to build the antenna. Over by the Chubby couple, something strange was happening. Someone had stolen Chubby's heart medication during the night. Without it, his heart rate would slow dangerously. His wife urged him to stay calm and avoid exertion while she looked for the missing pills. Back in the cabin, Sonia and Zach made a troubling discovery. The 9 bottles of drinking water they had left yesterday were now down to just 5. Half their food was gone too, including the chewing gum. Someone was definitely stealing supplies. To prevent more theft, Zach used electrical wire to secure the supply cabinet shut. Sonia had come to trust Zach, but she was convinced he wasn't really an insurance investigator, just like she wasn't truly a free-spirited traveler. She was, in fact, a photographer, documenting the lives of South American refugees attempting to sneak into the United States. These people all thought America was paradise, but the harsh truth was that most of them would never even be able to set foot in the country. That's exactly the dark, brutal reality Sonia was trying to expose. She chose to fly on a small private plane because of the cheap tickets. After sharing her story, she wanted to learn more about Zach. But before the conversation could go deeper, the sun began to set, and Zach immediately organized a group to search for water. While out exploring, Kevin spotted some mushrooms. Sonia quickly warned him not to touch those. They're known as black angels, and they're extremely poisonous. She said it offhandedly, but Dan, lurking nearby, took note, his expression thoughtful. Back at the camp, Chubby wasn't feeling well due to his heart condition, so he didn't join the group, but he couldn't stand sitting around either. Grabbing his suitcase, he convinced his wife to head out with him. Meanwhile, Dan discovered a small pond and was just about to strip down for a naked bath when Carlos stopped his smelly sausage. Carlos explained that while it might look like a simple pool, it was likely the entrance to an underground cave system with complex waterways and dangerous fish. Just as he finished speaking, Zach tossed one of Dan's shoes into the water. Dan grumbled, but moments later the shoe was dragged under by something unseen. Clearly, Carlos hadn't been exaggerating. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out from a distance. Everyone rushed toward the sound, only to discover that the sports equipment Chubby had claimed was in his suitcase, and it was actually a sniper rifle. He was hunting monkeys. After the group arrived, Chubby finally admitted that their trip was actually a hunting expedition. The revelation led to a heated argument, but Sonia cleverly used an empty fire extinguisher to collect fresh water. Then, using a piece of rubber tubing from the plane and the same extinguisher, she crafted a makeshift distillation device and successfully produced drinkable water. Night fell quickly. Lisa prepared a monkey meat dinner for everyone. It didn't look appetizing, but under the circumstances, survival came first. The only one who couldn't stomach it was Amy, who quietly handed her portion over to Chubby. As they ate, the group chatted. Zach asked Carlos what was in that box of his. It seems important to him since he risked his life to save it. Everyone turned to Carlos, curious. With a sigh, he removed a key from around his neck, opened the box, and pulled out a mask. He asked if they guys believed in heroes. This mask might look worthless to them, but to him, it's a symbol of who he was. He called it Lightning Ultraman. He explained that he was heading to the US for a wrestling competition, one he couldn't afford to lose. Last time, he'd been cheated by a wrestler nicknamed the American Governor. This time, he wanted to reclaim his honor. Sonia, however, quickly shot him down, thinking he was not going to make it to that match due to this accident. That night, while everyone else was asleep, Chubby lay awake. Maybe he ate too much monkey meat, but his greasy stomach was killing him. His wife told him to drink some water and try to rest. No one noticed the faint beam of a flashlight flickering in the plane's cabin. A mysterious figure emerged, retrieved a satellite phone from a tree hollow, and placed a call. On the other end was a woman watching the crash site from a hilltop, 8 days in the future. The content of their conversation remains unknown. At sunrise, the 3rd day after the crash began, with screams. Lisa's voice rang through the camp. Her husband's greasy face had turned blue, and he was vomiting uncontrollably. After a quick examination, Kevin determined it was food poisoning. He needed induced vomiting immediately. He asked Amy to grab some salt from the plane's storage locker, but the cabinet was still tied shut from the day before. She couldn't open it in time. Because of that delay, Chubby missed his window for treatment. Despite Kevin's best efforts, he couldn't be saved. Devastated, Lisa was convinced her husband had been murdered since they all ate the same food yesterday. Dan suddenly remembered the poisonous mushrooms Sonia had warned about. Someone must have used that information. Lisa stopped holding back, saying someone was trying to increase their odds of survival, 1 kill at a time. First, the pilot was murdered. Then someone stole her husband's heart meds. Now he's been poisoned. But Kevin remained skeptical. He dismissed her theory as paranoia. paranoia. He reasoned that the pilot died from post-surgery shock and her husband had a heart condition and an aneurysm. His body was weaker than the rest of theirs. He also ate 2 servings of monkey meat, so food poisoning isn't out of the question. Enraged, Lisa snapped that Kevin didn't know a damn thing. She used to work in hospice care. There was once a son who suffocated his mother with a pillow just because he got tired of taking care of her. Her face looked exactly like the pilot's when he died. Her outburst sent a wave of paranoia through the group. But before they could fully process their grief or suspicion, Zach broke open the storage cabinet and discovered all the remaining food was gone. Meanwhile, Dan told Amy that the pilot's phone was entirely in Spanish, so he dug up a video the pilot had recorded for his wife just before the crash. Carlos quickly translated its contents. At first, the video seemed fairly normal, just the pilot explaining the situation he was facing and the likelihood of an emergency landing. But as it went on, the tone took a darker turn. The pilot warned his wife that they would never let them go and urged her to hide her sexy body immediately. That raised even more questions. Who were they? And who exactly wouldn't be let go? The scene shifts to a flash forward to 8 days later back at the base. The sidekick soldier recognized Carlos from the 10 passports. He had seen Carlos compete before. To many in the Mexican community, Carlos was a superhero. But in his last match against the American governor, Carlos had lost due to the opponent cheating. As the scene transitions through a clip of that match, we return to the present at the crash site. Carlos pulled out a Snickers bar from seemingly nowhere. But wasn't all the food from the storage locker stolen? It seems that Carlos might be the thief. The story picks up on the 4th morning after the crash. Carlos was busy constructing an antenna, while Amy tried comforting the grieving widow. But Lisa, still in shock, said bitterly that she was with her husband for over 30 years. She never imagined he'd be murdered, and the worst part was that the killer was one of them. It could be anyone, including Amy's husband, Dan. Amy immediately bristled, saying she came here to comfort her, and now she was accusing her husband. Angry and hurt, she stormed off into the woods looking for Dan. As she wandered deeper, she suddenly looked up and saw the mysterious figure again. She turned to run, only to bump into Dan, but when she looked back, the figure had vanished. Was she hallucinating, or was there really someone else hiding in the woods? Back at camp, Carlos had finished building the antenna, but the black box and antenna were heavy. At least 2 or 3 people would be needed to haul them to the top of the mountain. After some discussion, the group decided Carlos, Kevin, and Sonia would go together. As they trekked through the forest, Carlos casually pulled a stick of gum from his pocket and popped it in his mouth, tossing the wrapper aside. Sonia, walking behind him, picked it up and recognized it immediately. It was the same brand that had gone missing from the storage locker. Suspicious, she kept quiet, for now. After a tough hike through steep terrain and streams, they neared the summit. But just as Sonia took her turn carrying the black box, she lost her footing and slipped. Luckily, Kevin reacted in time and caught her arm. The black box dangled precariously from the ledge. Sonia clung to him with one hand and, after some struggle, managed to grab the black box before it fell. Back near the camp, Lisa was out hunting. Zach approached to offer comfort, but she immediately pushed his heavy muscles away, saying she had never trusted him. She accused him of not being an insurance investigator, but a man who lied so easily and couldn't be trusted at all. Elsewhere, Dan was fuming after Amy told him Lisa suspected him of being the killer. Overwhelmed, Amy clutched her head and asked him to get some painkillers from the plane cabin. Once he left, she quickly rifled through his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. What she saw stunned her. Dan was supposed to be a driver back home, but she didn't know why there were so many business cards with important-sounding titles. 1,000 questions flooded her mind. Meanwhile, Sonia, Carlos, and Kevin had finally reached the summit, but even there, their phones had no signal. Carlos got to work assembling the antenna while Sonia chatted idly with Kevin. Before they could say much, Carlos finished his setup. Then, without missing a beat, he spit out the gum he'd been chewing and used it to stick the antenna and black box together at the connector. When he flipped the switch, the signal light began to blink. The black box had started transmitting. Now, all they could do was wait for rescue. At the camp, Zach was grilling raccoon meat, and the mouth-watering aroma triggered Dan's craving for alcohol. Ignoring everyone's protests, he rushed into the plane cabin, grabbed a bottle, and took a long swig. But when he came back out, Amy was nowhere to be seen. Dan immediately dropped the bottle and went searching for her. Meanwhile, she was sitting alone somewhere deep in the forest, staring sadly at the stack of business cards she had found in Dan's wallet, clearly questioning whether marrying him had been the right choice. Out of nowhere, the mysterious man appeared again, this time holding a submachine gun, slowly making his way toward her. She heard something, turned around, and just like that, he vanished again without traces of his smelly hormones. That's when Dan finally found her. But when she told him what she'd seen, Dan didn't believe her at all. That set her off. Furious, she demanded to know why Dan kept lying to her. She challenged him to explain all those different job titles on his business cards. Dan tried to calm her down, saying those were all jobs he held in the past, and this wasn't the time for suspicion. He promised once they got out of here safely, he would explain everything. Just then, Kevin arrived to fetch them for a meeting. The black box had successfully started transmitting a signal. They could be rescued as early as tomorrow. Sonia suggested they move to a more open area to make the rescue easier, but the rest of the group preferred to stay at the camp. Later that night, while everyone appeared to be asleep, Dan suddenly opened his eyes. At the same time, Carlos was still training like he was preparing for a fight. He had just finished a workout when a hooded figure appeared behind him, wearing his signature Ultraman mask. Before Carlos could react, the hooded man pulled out a knife and stabbed him multiple times. Just like that, Carlos was gone, sent to meet his maker. Day 5 after the crash. By morning, the group realized Carlos was missing. His belongings were still at camp, so it was unlikely he'd just run off. Lisa was convinced Carlos must have been murdered too. That's when Sonia spoke up, revealing something she'd kept quiet until now. Carlos might have been the one stealing food. If he had supplies on him, all the more reason to find him. Zach and the others set off to look for him, but then the camera cut to the black box at the mountaintop. Its antenna had been removed. Someone had sabotaged it. Back at camp, the 6 remaining members split into 3 teams: Kevin and Lisa, Dan and Amy, while Zach and Sonia stayed behind to guard the camp. Zach couldn't understand. Why would anyone resort to murder? He wondered if there were some hidden secret aboard the plane. He began searching the cabin, but after going through everything, he found nothing suspicious. Sonia stopped him, pointing out they still hadn't been rescued. Maybe the black box had failed. They should head back up and check it. So Sonia and Kevin packed fresh batteries and hiked toward the summit under the blazing sun, while the other 4 dozed off back at camp. Suddenly, Zach opened his eyes and slipped away into the forest. What he didn't realize was that Lisa had never actually fallen asleep. She'd been watching him the whole time, and now she was following him. Back on the mountain trail, Sonia and Kevin took a break in the shade. He warned her she shouldn't get too close to Zach because he was not someone she could trust. Sonia shot back, asking what made him trustworthy. Kevin replied that if he wanted her dead, he wouldn't have risked his life saving her yesterday. But before she could respond, Sonia noticed something: a lot of crows circling in the distance. She instantly realized what it meant. Crows feed on carrion, so there had to be a body nearby. Without hesitation, the 2 of them rushed downhill toward the site. Back at camp, Amy suddenly woke up with a start. She thought she heard someone calling her name from the woods. Grabbing a fire poker, she cautiously walked into the trees. Sure enough, the mysterious man appeared again, smiling at her while slowly raising the submachine gun. But this time, she didn't run. Clutching the fire poker, she lunged at him, only to find it was her husband, Dan. Sonia and Kevin reached the area where the crows had gathered. And sure enough, there it was, Carlos's corpse. News of his death quickly reached the rest of the group, plunging everyone into grim silence. Fortunately, Dan's injuries weren't too serious. He later confided in the others. When Amy was 7 years old, her elementary school had been the site of a shooting. 5 children and 2 teachers were killed. Ever since then, she had suffered from severe depression and paranoia. Despite years of therapy, she still sometimes believed the gunman from her childhood was out there, still hunting her. Zach and the others returned to the scene of Carlos's murder. After inspecting the body, Kevin confirmed the murder weapon was none other than Chubby's missing knife. Meanwhile, Sonia discovered the stolen food hidden under a nearby rock. With the murders piling up one after another, Zach was left bewildered, wondering what could possibly be the reason behind it all. As night fell, a tiny lizard crawled into a crack in the wrecked plane fuselage. It seems something shady is hidden inside. Outside a Mexican Airlines headquarters, 2 people stepped out of a car. It's Claire and her assistant. They introduced themselves to the airline staff, explaining they were investigators from the U.S. Federal Aviation Authority. Their mission was to investigate the recent plane crash. To everyone's surprise, the person in charge of the airline turned out to be a familiar face, the woman we saw earlier in the story. Her name was Cora. Cora was clearly caught off guard. She wondered why the FAA was here since the crash was in Mexican airspace. Claire explained the airline's majority shareholder was American. That was why they were involved. She then pulled out a passenger manifest and asked Cora to verify it. According to their investigation, the pilot's license had been revoked in the past due to substance abuse. Cora defended her company, saying their airline was known for its affordable fares, and that pilot was a decent man, so they decided to give him a second chance. The assistant, however, wasn't buying it. He pointed out that the so-called American parent company was essentially a shell corporation, one that had never operated in aviation at all. Cora snapped back, saying she just worked here. She got paid by the month. Whatever they were digging into, she was not the one with the answers. With that stonewall response, Claire and her assistant had no choice but to leave for now. Cora, however, pulled aside one of her men and instructed them not to let them in if those two come back looking for her. Then she pulled out a satellite phone and dialed a number, the same one linked to the phone hidden in the tree hollow, but no one picked up. Day 6 after the crash, with 6 survivors remaining. At the camp, Kevin and Dan were collecting distilled water, while Zach and Sonia were gathering firewood outside. Thunder rumbled in the distance, signaling that a storm was on its way. While they worked, Kevin mentioned the tattoo on Dan's back. He'd seen that kind of ink before, when he was treating inmates. It was a gang tattoo. That meant Dan had definitely done time. Dan flew into a rage. Without warning, he punched Kevin to the ground and jumped on top of him, fists flying. The noise quickly caught the attention of Zach and Sonia. Lisa grabbed her hunting rifle and stormed over, forcing them apart at gunpoint. Trying to smooth things over, Dan explained that the heat was making him irritable. But Lisa wasn't done. She dropped a bombshell. That morning, she had gone out to hunt raccoons, but discovered that all the bullets in her ammo box were missing. Only one bullet remained in the rifle. She didn't know who took them, but she was sure of one thing: whoever did it wanted them dead. To clear his name, Dan decided to come clean about his past. He confessed that he used to pose as a lawyer to help people illegally cross the border into the US. That's what landed him in prison for 2 years. After his release, he got a job as a driver, and that's when he met Amy. At first, he just wanted to mooch off her, but over time, he fell in love. Now, he swore that whoever laid a hand on Amy, he would fight him to the death. With that, he walked off, leaving the others stunned. Meanwhile, Sonia approached Lisa for a private chat, hoping to offer some comfort. But Lisa turned the conversation around, saying Sonia was awfully close to Zach, but she didn't trust him. She then revealed something important. The reason she was even here was because after Sonia and Kevin left yesterday, she saw Zach sneak off to this exact spot, slinking around like he was hiding something. She hadn't found out what yet, but she knew Zach was up to something shady. She said she had been hunting with her husband her whole life. She could spot a liar or a monster a mile away. Late that night, a torrential downpour began, and everyone scrambled back into the cabin. Kevin couldn't help but grumble that he felt like he was rotting alive in here. He wanted to know when they were ever getting out of this damned place. And there was still a killer on the loose. Just as he was complaining, Sonia made a startling discovery. Pointing to the ceiling, she said, "It's only just started leaking now, after all this rain. That means there's a hidden layer up there." Zach pried up a panel, and a handful of packages tumbled down. Everyone stared in disbelief. Illegal cargo worth at least $3 million. Sonia's eyes went wide. She claimed they were a decoy since this flight was really smuggling contraband. Dan guessed out loud, saying, "Maybe that's why someone's been killing them." Sonia shook her head because it made no sense to her. If they wanted the cargo, they wouldn't have to kill them all. They'd just take it. As they debated, Lisa suddenly realized Amy was missing. Dan rushed to the door to go after her, but Zach grabbed his arm, warning him not to go out there alone. Dan yanked free and stormed into the rain since that was his wife. Kevin and Sonia followed, and Zach and Lisa had no choice but to trail behind. They plunged into the jungle, calling her name as the rain poured down. Deep in the woods, Amy seemed oblivious to their shouts. She wandered to the edge of the pond, her eyes vacant, staring after the stack of business cards. Suddenly, the mysterious figure appeared again, knife in hand, creeping up behind her. Just then, Lisa burst into the clearing with her shotgun. Waving her gun, she shouted for Amy to get back to camp, causing the man to drop the knife. A bolt of lightning flashed, and when the light faded, the attacker had vanished. Lisa spun around, only to feel hands clamp around her throat from behind. With a strangled gasp, she collapsed, and the killer, wearing that Ultraman mask, slipped away into the darkness. Day 7 after the crash, with only 5 survivors remaining. They found Lisa's body and erupted in a furious argument. They couldn't figure out why they kept being killed. If it was about the contraband, there'd been no need to murder anyone to start with. At that moment, Sonia finally confessed her secret. She despised illegal smuggling. She'd been planning to get engaged, but at her own engagement party, her fiancé and his friends had spent the night drinking and doing drugs, and he overdosed and died. That trauma had driven her here, to expose human trafficking and contraband networks. Through investigation, she pulled out the missing bullets and a pistol. Under pressure, Zach admitted the gun was his. Then Sonia produced the satellite phone, also from Zach's hiding spot. He stared at it in disbelief, saying the gun was his, but that phone wasn't. Sonia's eyes blazed. She demanded to know why he never mentioned the gun and why he stole Lisa's bullets. Zach looked around at their accusing faces, confessing that he was from the DEA. He was here undercover, investigating Sonia and this flight. If he really wanted them dead, he could have shot them all himself. And if they'd found his wallet back in camp, they'd know he was telling the truth. Kevin rifled through Zach's pockets, finding only $1,000 in cash, but no ID. Zach's face twisted in frustration. He claimed that since Carlos was murdered, tensions have been sky high. He hid Lisa's bullets so no one would turn on each other. He didn't know who planted the phone either. It's obvious. The real killer wanted them to suspect him. If they did, they would all end up dead. Kevin, fed up, grabbed the satellite phone and wanted to call for help, but it was locked. Dan demanded Zach's passcode. Zach snarled that the phone was not his. Dan, unmoved, slammed Zach with the stock of the shotgun. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The 4 survivors took stock of their supplies. 6 shotgun shells left. Kevin suggested Dan hand over the gun, saying he didn't know how to use it anyway. But Amy said she could use it because her dad took her hunting since she was a kid. Kevin shut up his smelly mouth. After that, Sonia went to find Zach again, hoping he would reveal the password to the satellite phone. Zach was speechless, saying the phone really wasn't his and he was truly a narcotics officer. He deduced that it must have been Kevin or Dan who took his ID and planted the phone at his hideout. Upon hearing this, Sonia immediately returned to the camp. Dan decided it was time to teach Zach a lesson. He proposed drawing straws to decide who would do it, and as luck would have it, Kevin drew the shortest one. What a coincidence. As a doctor, no one was more suited to the job. Then, the remaining 3 planned to head up the mountain to check on the black box. After a brief exchange with Zach, Kevin ultimately decided to take action. His fists, heavy as sandbags, rained down on Zach's face without mercy. Meanwhile, the trio successfully reached the mountaintop, only to discover the antenna was loose, which meant the signal hadn't been transmitted at all. Sonia had no choice but to reattach it. The scene then shifted to the DEA office in Houston. It turned out that Claire and her assistant were also DEA agents. They had long had their eyes on that plane. The director informed them that a signal had been received from the downed aircraft's black box half an hour ago. The problem, however, was that the signal came from an outdated black box, which made the location highly inaccurate, with a margin of error between 12 and 25 nautical miles, and that entire area was dense, untouched jungle. The good news was that the Mexican military had already begun a search. The bad news was that they refused any foreign interference, and if the DEA got involved, they'd be thrown in jail. Hearing this, Claire decided to secretly infiltrate as a civilian. Back in the jungle, despite being brutally beaten, Zach still insisted the phone wasn't his. Left with no choice, Kevin pulled out a pair of medical forceps from his pocket, and the next second, he forcibly yanked out one of Zach's toenails. His screams echoed through the entire valley. It turns out Claire was determined to go to Mexico because Zach was her husband, and the two even had a daughter together. Late at night, exhausted, Zach finally fell asleep. But in the darkness, a mysterious figure approached, holding a sharp metal shard. The figure sneaking up on Zach in the night turned out to be Sonia. Seeing it was her, Zach was relieved, but Sonia still didn't fully trust him. She couldn't understand why he had lied. Zach explained again that he really was a narcotics officer. He then analyzed the situation. Only 5 survivors remained, and Dan and Amy were clearly in it together. If he died now, Sonia would be on her own. His reasoning finally convinced Sonia, and she untied him. Still, she warned him to run as far as he could. If she saw him again, she wouldn't hesitate to shoot. The next morning, when the others discovered Zach had escaped, they were all visibly tense, especially Kevin, who had tortured him the day before. Dan bluntly warned Sonia and Kevin to stay far away from him and Amy. He was leaving with her immediately. After watching them walk off, Sonia turned to Kevin and said, "It's just them now. They needed to stick together." But before she even finished speaking, Kevin pulled out the rope used to tie up Zach. The cut was clean, obviously sliced with a sharp blade. That was all the proof he needed. Sonia had carried Chubby's knife all along, which meant she was the one who had cut the rope. And with that, Sonia found herself completely alone. Dan and Amy sat together in a thicket not far from the camp, sharing a quiet moment. Dan tried to reassure her, saying they had already fixed the black box and that rescue teams would likely arrive soon, but Amy couldn't find it in her heart to feel hopeful. Meanwhile, at the Mexican military base, a helicopter had been dispatched based on the last received signal. It quickly reached the vicinity of the crash site, but searching for a handful of survivors in this dense, sprawling forest was anything but easy. As Dan talked about his past, he admitted he'd been a con artist for years and had initially planned to mooch off Amy, but as time went on, he realized he genuinely loved her. Strangely, though, Amy showed no reaction to his heartfelt confession. Suddenly, a large flock of crows appeared overhead. The other 3 survivors noticed the ominous sign, and sensing trouble, they all headed toward where the birds had gathered. Sonia was the first to arrive, and just as she feared, Dan and Amy lay shot dead. Zach soon showed up as well. Without hesitation, Sonia raised her pistol, convinced Zach was the killer. But then Kevin emerged from the trees. Seizing the moment to inspect the bodies, he suddenly picked up the shotgun on the ground, sparking a tense standoff with Sonia. Kevin insisted that Sonia and Zach were partners in smuggling contraband, but Sonia shot back, claiming that if they were working together, she wouldn't report him hiding a gun. Zach, in turn, was certain Kevin was the murderer. Kevin argued that if he were the killer, he wouldn't have gone to the trouble of rescuing Sonia in the first place. As their heated debate raged on, the distant whir of a helicopter sounded overhead. From the pilot's perspective, spotting a few people lost in the vast forest was impossible. The helicopter soon disappeared into the distance, and the three realized they had missed their chance for rescue. Zach quickly suggested they build a large bonfire to signal any future search parties. Sonia remained suspicious of Kevin, while Kevin, desperate for rescue, reluctantly agreed. He unloaded the shotgun's shells and tossed it into the pond. Sonia proposed they light the fire on the mountaintop where it would be more visible. Kevin refused, still wary that Sonia and Zach were working together, and insisted on staying at the camp to wait. Ultimately, Sonia had no choice but to go with Zach to the summit. With a toenail painfully missing, Zach struggled forward, stopping frequently to rest. Then, unexpectedly, Sonia confessed her feelings to him. Zach's expression darkened, saying he was already married and had a daughter. Sonia, embarrassed, quickly changed the subject. She was convinced the killer was Kevin and that he was likely watching them from the shadows. No sooner had she spoken than a gunshot rang out from the forest. Both froze in shock. How was that possible? Kevin had thrown the shotgun into the pond. After some discussion, they decided to return to camp to investigate. What they found was chilling. Kevin's body, shot in the back, his head submerged in the pond. Zach hurriedly dragged him out, but Sonia recoiled in horror. The flesh on Kevin's face had been torn apart by piranhas. It dawned on her that the mysterious figure Amy had seen earlier might not have been a hallucination. After all, Sonia and Zach had been together, and Kevin definitely hadn't killed himself. With darkness approaching, the two decided to spend the night inside the cabin. Zach quickly sealed the door with a steel plate. As time passed, they slowly drifted off to sleep. But outside the cabin, a mysterious figure picked up the satellite phone and called Cora. What was said remains a mystery. Day 9 after the crash, only Zach and Sonia remain. Early in the morning, they reached the mountaintop, now shrouded in thick fog. Feeling their way carefully, they finally located the black box. Seeing it still working lifted Zach's spirits considerably. At the base, just as the two suspected, a new search and rescue operation was planned for the day. On the mountaintop, Zach took off his socks, revealing that his wound looked worse than expected. Seeing this, Sonia urged him to stay put and clean the injury while she went to gather firewood nearby. But only a few steps away, Sonia vanished from Zach's sight. Suddenly, she heard a noise, and just as she pulled out her pistol to defend herself, a mysterious figure appeared behind her and knocked her out with a single blow. The stranger then picked up the pistol from the ground and calmly approached Zach, who found himself backed against the edge of a cliff. Before Zach could say a word, the mysterious person fired a shot, sending him tumbling off the cliff. The figure then returned to Sonia's side. She was regaining consciousness and tried to get a glimpse of her attacker before death. Slowly, the masked assailant removed the mask and pressed the pistol's trigger. The scene shifts to the Mexican military rescue helicopter, returning for a second search near the source of the signal. This time, they finally spotted the black box on the mountaintop. Using it as their reference point, they soon located the wreckage of the plane tucked in a mountain hollow. Since they couldn't land nearby, the team touched down on the summit and hiked to the camp. The campsite showed clear signs of recent life, but no survivors were in sight. The pilot sent others to scour the surrounding area, while he and another soldier inspected the plane's cabin. What they found was unexpected. The overhead compartment was completely empty. Then a shout came from outside. Neatly arranged were 9 bodies laid out in the clearing. The grim scene stunned the soldiers, but as they began moving the bodies, the pilot noticed something strange. There had to be survivors. No one would arrange 9 corpses so tidily otherwise. Meanwhile, Claire had arrived in Mexico and learned from local police about the discovery of 9 bodies at the crash site. Due to severe decomposition, identification was still pending. A forensic expert was brought in from a nearby city to perform autopsies at the base. This news quickly reached Cora, who was waiting outside the base. The story then flashed back to the beginning of the show when the Mexican military was transporting the bodies back. The crew had found 10 passports among the wreckage, and with the pilot's firm belief that at least one survivor remained, a rescue team took off again to search the crash site. Just as the helicopter left, a body bag in the morgue suddenly twitched. A knife slashed through the fabric. At the same time, on the way to the base, the forensic doctor was intercepted by Cora, who claimed to be a reporter investigating the crash. After confirming the doctor's identity, she didn't hesitate to draw her pistol. Back in the morgue, a man jumped off a mortuary slab, set down his knife, and headed to wash his face. It was none other than Kevin. Outside, Cora impersonated the forensic expert and gained entry to the base. After a warm welcome, she told the commander time was critical and demanded to begin the autopsies immediately. The commander agreed and assigned the sidekick soldier to escort her to the morgue. Inside, Kevin opened another body bag and was about to do whatever he had planned with his knife when he heard voices outside. The soldier and Cora entered, only to witness a gruesome sight. Every corpse had been gutted and mutilated. Before the sidekick soldier could react, Kevin knocked him out cold. The two nasty lovers wasted no time getting physically close. Fantastic, but too fast. After a brief exchange of saliva, Kevin went back to work. It turned out he had hidden the contraband inside the bodies' stomachs. Elsewhere, Claire arrived at the base, demanding to see the bodies as a victim's relative. The commander refused, but no one could have guessed. Zach was still alive. After waking up, he heard the helicopter overhead and tried desperately to call out, but to no avail. Just as the rescue helicopter was about to leave, Zach pulled out his sunglasses from his pocket. That simple act caught the pilot's attention and saved his life. Meanwhile, inside the morgue, Kevin and his accomplice were dousing everything with gasoline, clearly ready to destroy the evidence now that they had what they came for. As soon as a match was struck, flames quickly engulfed the room. Just after they left, the sidekick soldier woke up and scrambled out. Claire had barely convinced the commander to head toward the morgue when the building exploded. A jeep suddenly barreled out, guns blazing, recklessly charging through the temporary base's defenses and forcing a way out. Cut to the sidekick soldier catching his breath, explaining he had no idea who attacked him. Claire immediately guessed the killer must have been hidden among the 9 bodies all along. The commander tried to argue, but the sidekick soldier quickly added that it was likely true. Since some of the sealed body bags hadn't been opened due to the unbearable stench of decay, the murderer could have easily concealed himself inside. Just then, a phone rang. After answering, the commander shared the good news with Claire. Zach had been found alive. Overcome with emotion, she rushed straight to the hospital to see the injured Zach. The doctor told her 2 bullets had missed all vital organs, and during the fall down the cliff, numerous tree branches had softened his impact. With some recovery time, he would be fine. The next day, the 10th day after the crash, Kevin was using a fake passport, making it impossible to track him down. Meanwhile, Zach had cleverly pieced everything together. First, Claire never revealed her identity as a narcotics officer when she investigated the airline. Second, their enemies still didn't know Zach had survived, so they were very likely to return to the airline company. If they acted now, they could catch them red-handed. And soon, Zach's hunch proved right. At that moment, Kevin and Cora were wrapping up a deep muscle conversation. Through their dialogue, it became clear the pilot was indeed in on the scheme, with Kevin tasked to oversee the transport. After the crash, Kevin first thought was the pilot had to die, but then he realized Zach, posing as an insurance investigator, was a major threat. To be safe, he decided to send everyone to their graves. The corpse looked like Kevin because he had swapped clothes with Dan and used the piranhas in the pond to mutilate the face. The final gunshot heard was actually caused by him tossing a bullet from the removed shotgun cartridge into the fire. Among all these steps, the most brilliant was how Kevin disguised himself as a corpse. It turns out the heart medication lost earlier was all in his hands. Before faking death, he swallowed all the pills, risking his life to induce a coma-like state. Slowed breathing, slowed heartbeat. Luckily, everything went according to plan and he revived inside the morgue. The entire scheme was flawless, except for one thing: Zach survived. By now, Zach had linked up with the Mexican police preparing for a full-scale arrest operation. But meanwhile, Cora suddenly felt her breathing tighten, her body weakening. Kevin confessed that he had put mushrooms in the food. Turns out from the start, Kevin suspected Cora because in the pilot's farewell video to his girlfriend, the way he addressed her was Cora's nickname. From that moment on, Kevin vowed that if he escaped alive, Cora would be the first to go. When Zach and his team arrived, Kevin was already in the cockpit, preparing to take off. Hearing the plane's engine roar, Zach ran toward it. Kevin was shocked to see Zach alive and immediately began ascending. Desperately, Zach fired multiple shots at the departing plane. Cut to Kevin flying over the forest, thrilled by the contraband on board, when suddenly the cockpit alarm blared. Fuel was low. Kevin looked out just in time to see a bullet hole in the fuel tank. The same bullet from earlier had pierced it, and that suggested his final fate. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.